What is up, everyone? It is Chewburger84 here with another episode of One Nerd All Things, this podcast where I talk about all things that interest me. And today it is finally time for me to live up to the nerd part of this, where I talk about something that caught my eye, which I'm hoping is great news for Australian nerds. Before I get to the content, thank you very much for those people that have been interacting with me on YouTube, on Spotify, Instagram, etc. You can find me everywhere at Chewburger84. Any of those likes, any of those comments, any of those subscribes helps me out a lot, but let me earn it first, folks. Let me entertain you. Now, this is a bit of a change up from the last couple episodes, something a little bit more fun and something more my traditional speed. So for those of you that don't know me, I am a huge nerd. And one of my passions, especially with my family, is that we collect Pokemon cards. So my wife and I did this for quite a while when we were living overseas. It was something that helped keep us sane while we're living across the far side of the planet during COVID. And in the last couple of years, my daughter has gotten into it. And as a family, it's become a real passion. Like, we love it dearly. We chase cards, we rip packs, we go to shows, we look at sealed stuff, we look at raw stuff. It's just a really fun hobby. You know, something to talk about as the family. Who's your favorite Pokemon? What's your favorite card? Debating and discussing what the next set's going to be. It's a hell of a lot of fun. It has become a lot less fun in recent years, and we can talk about the whole scalper thing a different time, I suppose, where you've probably seen these fights at Walmarts in America, although we are getting some of that culture start to hit Australia with people, you know, pushing in front of others and swarming under doors at Kmart's, Big W's, and Costco's near you, scrambling to get their hands on this cardboard, not because they want to collect it, not because they want to rip it with their kids, but because they want to flip it on Facebook Marketplace or eBay or whatever platform there might be for some quick cash. So that to the side, there is something called PSA. So let me do a quick PSA on what PSA is, okay? So PSA is, I think it's called the Professional Sports Authenticator. I think that's their official name. Yeah, PSA, Professional Sports Authenticator. They've been around forever. I've known them for a long time because when I was a kid, I used to collect NBA basketball cards, which I know is a very weird thing for a kid that grew up in regional Australia to have gotten into. The Charlotte Hornets were my jam. I grew up in the era of, you know, Shaq and Muggsy Bogues. All those guys, man. I missed that era. But it was cool. I had collector cards when I was a kid. I wish I had Pokemon. I wish I kept them. I could be a multimillionaire at this point. So what used to happen is if you really, really, really loved your cards, it wasn't so much of a thing in America, but you would send them off to this place called PSA in the States, and they would grade your sports cards somewhere between 1 and 10. You know, 1 being in relatively poor condition and 10 being as perfect as it can possibly be. So over the years, they've expanded to grading comic books, to grading collector cards like Pokemon or Onepiece, Star Wars, you name it, PSA is everywhere. Now, why is this such a big deal? Or what am I even talking about? So I thought I'd give you a couple of my examples here of some that we've sent away recently. And excuse the tape, I've currently got my cards in witness protection. So you send them away and they put them in this slab just like this. Okay, it protects the card forever, which is the main reason that we did it for some of our treasure cards. And you are hoping for this up here, a perfect grade, a perfect 10. Now, why do you want that? Does it feel good to know that you've got a perfect card in your collection? You betcha. If you're a great, dedicated collector, it feels fantastic to get one of those back in the mail. Now, that's not the usual feeling, okay? A lot of people can probably empathize with this, where you'll send away a big piece of your collection, some card that you love very much, you're proud of, you believe it's in relatively good condition, and then instead you get something like a 5, and then you want to throw things at a wall, and it's very upsetting. But ultimately, that's the game. You know what it is. In the eyes of these professional collectors, it now has a value. And that is ultimately where these cards come all over the place, right? So why do people want to do PSA now more than possibly they ever have? Well, the reason being is this, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to show you a little bit of my graded collection. Most of these we've sent away ourselves recently for our family. And I'm going to show you some examples of why getting a higher PSA grade rarity is very, very desirable, especially if you are in this hobby to make money in the long term. Or if you are trying to, I guess, trade for cards that are more expensive or more rare than the ones that you have, because this gives you buying leverage or trading leverage by being able to get something more valuable. So what's a good example? Let's say the Misty Psyduck here from Destined Rivals. And shout out to Collector, by the way. I wish I was sponsored by these guys. But ultimately, they have this wonderful app where you can store your collection, track the market. It's awesome. You know, it's been a game changer for us. I have a terrible memory. I'm lucky that my 6-year-old, when we're at card shows, can say, nah, Dad, we've already got that one. But when I don't have her with me, ultimately, I've got this. So if we have a look at this card right now, if you pull this fresh out of a pack and it's in great condition, someone might be willing to buy it from you for around 84 Australian dollars. Okay, this card right here. Beautiful card, by the way. Shout out back to my era of Pokemon. I grew up in Pokemon Red, Blue, and the original anime. It's why I fell in love with the hobby. Me and a friend of mine used to be in high school. Yes, I said at high school, with the Game Boys, with the old link cable that connected the two devices together. And he used to flog me with Mewtwo, and we had this agreement that the two of us would not use the same Pokemon, but let's not go there. So Misty is a legendary trainer. Psyduck is one of my favorite Pokemon. It's my wife's favorite Pokemon, as a matter of fact. Now, let's say you sent this thing off to PSA, and this is where the grade kind of matters, I guess, if you're a real fan of this hobby, or if you're in this hobby as a vendor or someone trying to trade for value. So if you get this card back, and it is, say, a PSA grade 5, it might actually devalue down to about $53. Okay, you actually lose, quote unquote, $30 of value on this card. It's still the same card, okay, to most people, right? But you turn around and might have a couple of white dots on the back or some whitening or basically something that shows that it's aged, or, you know, a kid may have actually played with it. Not like us losers who put it in sleeves and cardboard and no one's allowed to touch it with their real hands, right? However, if you are to get the perfect 10, it changes the value of this card from its raw value, if you will, so what it was out of the pack at $84, right up to $511, right? And there are examples where the value of these cards can go from 5 times, 10 times, 20 times the value, depending on how many of them are out there. So for example, a PSA 10, all right, there are only 6,732 on the planet, which is actually quite a few. I say only. Whereas some of the rarest cards on the planet, there may be only 1 or 2. You know, legendarily in the last couple of months, we've seen Logan Paul, who had the only, I guess there is a lot of controversy attached to this statement, but one of the only PSA 10 Pikachu illustrators in the planet. And that card sold for about 23, 24 million Australian dollars. All right, the most valuable card sold in recent memory. So the grading does matter, all right? But here in Australia, it's always been a bit of a nightmare to do it, because to send this off to PSA, all right, you can't actually deal with them directly. We haven't been able to for a while. One of the reasons for that was Senor Trump in America with the tariffs, that they actually, for a while, you were not able to post to America. Then when they reopened it again, there are these specific tariff channels you have to go through. And PSA kind of said for a while, it's all too hard basket. Then recently, they announced this new pathway that they were setting up shop in Hong Kong and opening a grading office there. And you had to go through this weird process, which this is where I earned my nerd street cred. I did this. I registered my ISP and my IP address. I'm sure I'm on some Hong Kong watch list right now. The things that they see on this camera, I mean, if they want to watch that, that's their problem, you know. So you can send it via them. You can trade with them directly. It's still relatively expensive though. Like to do anything from here in Australia as a nerd that involves overseas counterparts, it's a bit of a nightmare. And I'm sure it's the same for the rest of the Asia Pacific as well. So then a couple of days ago, we had this incredible news, which has been verified by one source. Okay. And I'm still looking for more. So at the moment, I'm hoping it's true, but these guys have had a pretty strong record in the brief period of time that I've been interacting with them. And that is the guys over at Drop Zone in Australia. Okay, so they're an Instagram and Discord group that basically share information about Pokemon releases. They're a pretty great crew and friendly bunch of guys. I see a lot of them at card shows all the time. They have basically announced that from their sources that PSA is setting up shop in Australia. Now, I really, really hope this is true, because it allows people like myself, depending on the value of how much it's going to cost and whether you're allowed to do it as Joe Public when it gets here. But I'm really hoping it's true, because if it is, it means that I'm not going to necessarily gamble on only my most valuable cards, but maybe, every now and again, sending some of those meme cards, those ones that are, always damaged, like promo cards. So anyone out there who's thinking about going into grading, let me give you a tip that I wish someone gave me before my very first submissions of PSA. Promo cards, all right, they usually come in boxes. They're on the front. You'll have a couple of packs in there and they'll have this sealed plastic on the front. But the promo cards are just kind of sitting there in this sealed plastic case and they look beautiful. Promo cards are quite often fantastic. The problem is what they do when they ship around the planet is they bang around inside that packaging and they very commonly get damage on the corners, almost all of them, or whitening, or if they've been out for a long time, especially older stuff, they can get UV damage because ultraviolet light is the enemy of Pokemon cards. Humidity is the enemy of cardboard, which is great to live in Queensland, Australia, because you get all of these things. But ultimately, they're very, very hard to grade well. Okay, so sometimes you'll get these promos and you go, oh, I don't know, man, I think this one looks pretty good, right? Which is usually a recipe for inevitable heartbreak. But at the moment, I would not send that away because you would go, look, my eyes, it looks pretty good. And I've done my little measurement with this tool. And yes, I have a tool. I'm that level of nerd. I've got a black light. I've got a jeweler's loop where I get right in. Like I'm looking at a black diamond up close to verify its authenticity and make sure it's not fake. And you go, oh, I don't think I'd send this though, because it's not worth, I think currently to send cards from Australia, a lot of the middlemen, okay, so local card dealers who have these accounts with PSA or other overseas graders, it's anywhere between a minimum of sort of $55, $60, but usually about $70, $75 at the moment, which is pretty crazy. It was around $50. It used to be around 30 business days for the lowest tiers. The more you pay, the faster you get it back. Depending on the value of card, depends on what fees you pay. It just becomes this, far too rigorous nightmare to go through. So you just go, look, this is all too hard. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to grade it. If, however, they are setting up shop here in Australia, then that is wonderful news for all the gamers here, for all the nerds here, because it means that we can maybe participate in this kind of thing. I also do think that it means that the amount of graded cards out there is going to go nuts, which I'm hoping that as a collector means that the average value of a lot of cards actually comes down, because if there's more of them, it's less rarity. Therefore, being more common, more accessible, there's competition, so the prices come down. That's my favorite time as a collector. I know people who are buying and investing and, sealing things for 1,200 years. They have a very different opinion. So, what it does to the market, I have no idea. And I think a lot of Australians who are seeing this news are like, great, this is for Australians. But I'm sure it's not going to be just us, because I know that there is a massive Pokemon fan base in the Philippines. I've met a lot of these guys at card shows in Dubai over the years through work. And they're fanatics, man. They love the hobby just as much as anyone. So I'm sure that means most of Southeast Asia, their local submission hub will become here rather than Hong Kong or America. So whether or not these insanely long lead times. So to give you an idea, my cards, they were still quoting, I think it was around 40 business days, 45 business days when I first submitted, and my cards were gone for 6 months. I've only ever done these 2 submissions for PSA, and it took, the better part of 6 months to get them back. So will that actually reduce the times for us? Will it reduce the turnaround times for the Americans or the North Hemisphere? Because, a lot of the Southern Hemisphere is now going to stay local. Does it split it up? It's going to be very interesting to see what's their capacity, what are they investing in, and what are they doing for quality control? Like, what happens if we get a bunch of new graders in Australia who are far more strict? Do we end up with far less PSA 10s? Does it go the other way? A lot of the new guys are just like Australians. They go, nah, mate, I'll give you a 10. Don't worry about it. Fighting for the little guy. And then all of a sudden they're more lax and more 10s go onto the market. And that's one of the controversies of PSA. And we'll talk about a few more of those controversies in a sec, especially over the last year, because, oh my God, it is very subjective because it's human eyes, it's human interactions, and it's one person in that moment who may have seen tens of thousands of cards in their lifetime. Like, don't get me wrong. I am certain that these people have a lot of experience and they know what they're looking for. But I can tell you this, that on a bad mood day for me, there would be a difference between a PSA 8 and a PSA 10, even though it's exactly the same card. Human bias is absolutely a real thing. If you see 15 of the same card that day, and all of a sudden you're starting to rethink, well, that last one was a 10, but this one actually looked even better. So is that one a 10? Maybe I'm going to rethink things now. Then the next 3 or 4 cards kind of suffer because you're worried that, by confirmation bias, you've made the right or the wrong decisions. So you start to course correct based on your recent experiences with other cards. So look, I personally think it's awesome if this is true. I really hope that it is. It'd be fantastic for the hobby here in Australia. I do worry that it means that more and more people will sit back on raw cards, because I do worry that it will mean the raw market will start to dry up because all these vendors, and there are a lot in Australia. We do have a very, very invested financial market for Pokemon in Australia where, again, it's mainly in sealed from what I can see. It's mainly people racing out to Kmart, buying all the stock they possibly can, and then just trying to flip it, as quickly as possible. So I do hope that the raw market doesn't dry up because it is relatively healthy-ish at the moment. Like, you do see a lot of good caliber cards at a lot of shows, ranging anywhere from your $2, $3 cards right through to, your Poncho Charizards and stuff like that, which look fantastic, but they're 15 to 20 grand, well beyond the average trader. So what I'm worried about is that if all of a sudden we flood to much more of a graded market at shows, because obviously that's where the real money is for those guys, the reality is for the average collector who just wants to pick up a really cool card of their favorite Pokemon at a show, maybe that becomes less achievable for them. It could go either way. I personally am excited. I personally am going to submit cards that no people have any business submitting. I'm going to submit meme cards. I'm talking Mankeys. I'm talking Primates. I'm going to be coming out with ludicrous stuff. There will be a population 1 of something that one of you will say, why the hell did that human being grade that? And it will be me, because I can, as long as it's cheap. In America, I've heard that like a basic submission might be around 15 to 20 American dollars. I think it might have gone up recently. If we're around that kind of price, I'd potentially mess around with a lot of low value cards that I think are in great shape. That maybe I'm doing it for myself. Maybe I'm doing it because I want to see what would some psycho pay for a population 1 of 1, of a very obscure card. Who knows, man. It's exciting because it gives us options, I guess, is the main point of this particular story. But I also have to say at the same time that if this news had came out, let's say 2 or 3 years ago, I probably would have been way, way more optimistic than I am now. Because what worries me, and I guess a lot of people at the moment when it comes to grading cards, is that, PSA is not exactly shy of controversy in the last couple of years. They've made some major moves out there, a lot of which are considered relatively sketchy by collectors. In some cases has crossed the line to possible fraud or alleged fraud, I should say, and some wild example stories. So what are we talking about here? One of the recent big scandals is that PSA has now started buyback schemes. Okay. So with buyback, it means that, okay, you send your card over, it gets its grade, and then they say to you, okay, based on what we've seen, it is this value. And you could send it all the way back and you have your card back, and that's fantastic. But look, if you are thinking about selling it anyway, why don't you just sell it to me? And then I'll resell it for you on eBay. And they have become one of the largest card sales vendors on eBay now. So PSA is not only a grader, but they are also a secondary seller, as in they sell slabbed cards. Now, this has led to quite a few scandals over the last 12 months where we have seen them buy back at very low value and then sell at very high value. It's not illegal. I guess it's what vendors have done for years. Is it kind of sketchy? Maybe. Then there is allegations of bias, where they've said, well, cards that maybe shouldn't be a 10 by, I guess, certain standards have slipped through, and now they are much, 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 much more valuable, which means that if they're allowed to flip it, that means that they make a hell of a lot more money. So do they have any internal biases now to say that, well, I want to sell this card, so I want to make as much profit as possible. So if I'm flipping in my brain between a 9 or a 10, am I more likely to go to a 10? Now, I would imagine that the graders have quite a degree of separation from the point of sale. I don't think they're making a cut of any card that they grade, so I don't think that's likely. But when the company does have that interest, you always wonder, is there any pressure from management to push this down? There are also collaborations with places like GameStop, where these places have priority because they're a very large group. They get cards away. They're coming back much faster. And then we get into the really big controversies. So, for example, we saw a couple this year. There was a card. I cannot remember the name of the card. It was a Tri-Holo, which basically was one of those cards where you remember this a lot in the 90s when I was a kid, where you'd look at a picture and as you walk past it, it changes into a different picture, like a hologram. And you step backwards and forwards, and it goes from like a Charizard X to a Charizard Y. It's cool, right? So there are very few cards of that around. And I want to say it was a Jirachi, but it may not be. A Deoxys. I think it might have been a Deoxys. This guy had a perfect 10 Deoxys. He sends it away to PSA just to get it reslabbed, all right? Because these cases, after a while, they do get a little bit flimsy. And sometimes they can get dropped and damaged. You just want to send it away and just get a nice, beautiful new case to keep the card protected. So this gentleman did this. It was valued about 60,000 USD at the time. Sends his card away and they damage it. Okay, when they pull it out, they drop it, or I don't know exactly what happened, but basically they busted it. And they send this guy an email back saying, hey, look, we've damaged your card. We're really sorry about that. We're going to send it back to you. It's now a PSA 6. Now, we've looked up our own sales values of this and recent solds on eBay. We believe that at a PSA 6, it's probably worth about $40,000. So what we're going to do is give you $20,000 compensation. And this guy said, no. I sent you a $60,000 card. I expect $60,000 of compensation. Now, if you read what they sent to this gentleman, the language in there was insane, where they were basically threatening him that if you don't respond in a brief period of time, they'll tear up the deal. No offer. You get what you get. There was language in there that basically said, if you tell anyone about this, we have the right to renege on the deal, basically trying to protect themselves from negative public discourse in a time where they're very much under scrutiny. So, of course, this guy does what he should. He goes to the internet and says, what the hell, man? What would you guys do? Internet goes on fire. All these big collectors, all these big YouTubers for Pokemon lose their mind. And obviously it creates a big deal. PSA gets forced to reach out. Now, at this stage, I don't think there's been an announced resolution, but the guy involved said that, look, they are trying to make this right. The Logan Paul, which I mentioned recently, that card, the Pikachu Illustrator, there are allegations that it has been submitted multiple times and that maybe the first couple of times that it was sent for submission, it didn't get a 10. And this is what basically leans into the subjective or possibly influential nature of PSA when it comes to these cards. There were rumors that this has been a PS8 in the past. Now it's obviously a PS10 or PSA 10, which obviously makes it far, far, far more valuable. There was controversy separate to PSA where Golden Auctions, halfway through them auctioning this card off, actually had it reslabbed, which means that technically the card that people started bidding on at the start of the auction, that means it's actually technically not 100% the same card, which, let me explain that. The card itself on the inside is the same, but there was a mythos attached to that card because obviously there was Logan Paul buying it for $5 million, one of the biggest deals of all time, way, way back when that happened. He got a diamond encrusted slab holder. He wore that, I think, to UFC fights. I believe he wore it at WrestleMania because this dude's in the WWE now. So, you know, you've had the sweat of international superstars on this thing. So it's not just about the card now, it's about the whole PSA slab. So when you take that slab off and you swap it out halfway through an auction, well, what if you were out there trying to get a sample of Logan Paul's DNA? What if that was your real angle here on trying to buy that card? You got screwed, basically. So look, there's a whole bunch of controversy on that side. But ultimately, you know, you can regrade. And this happens all the time where people will submit it once, they'll get an 8 or a 9 or even lower, and they get it back and they reinvestigate the card and they show their friends and experts and they go, what the hell, man, this should be a 10. They go, yeah, it should be a 10. And they send it back and sure enough, it becomes a 10. Or 10s get submitted from years ago, then they resubmit it now and it comes back 7, 6, 5 because the standards have changed or the opinion of the person that day has changed. So there is subjectivity there, which is a huge point of discussion and a huge point of controversy with PSA as well. Then we have allegations of regrading, which obviously has been proven. We've had it be admitted by PSA, where a guy submitted a bunch of Pikachu Zekrom Tag Team promo cards, sent heaps and heaps of them away. I talked about this earlier, why those promo cards can become so valuable, because they really are hard to 10. And he got 88888888888. Now, he basically said, screw it. I don't want to go through the issues of getting it all shipped back to me. Just, he took the buyout offer. But then he got curious, logged back on, searched his serial numbers, and lo and behold, those things that he sold that were PSA 8s at the time had been regraded, right, by PSA and were now PSA 10s. And this guy's like, what the hell? You paid me PSA 8 money, but you should have paid me PSA 10, or I might have actually taken the cards back if it was PSA 10. What happened? How did this occur? There was a whole explanation. It all sounded super sketchy. So the reality is grading with PSA is not the straightforward process, even if it is straightforward to send it to them, you know, because our barrier to entry becomes lower in Australia. Will that mean that people will actually take their prized possessions, or perhaps, you know, somewhat risky investments if you're on the investment side or the vendor side of this game? Are people going to do that if they're worried that, well, what's the quality going to be like? You know, am I going to be assured that what I'm spending my money on is actually going to become worth it to me as a collector, or financially worth it to the person who is flipping? It's really hard to know, right? It is really hard to know what the quality is going to be like, what the assurances are like. They're also buying half the planet. You know, they've just bought one of the biggest competitors that they ever had as well, which is Beckett Grading. I say biggest, that's not really true. CGC is probably closer in raw numbers. But when we talk about Beckett, they're infamous for having the hardest to get black label cards, which means a perfect 10. Because with PSA, you get a card back, but no one really tells you why it was graded the way it was. With Beckett, they'll give you the corners are like this, the centering of the picture of the card is this. And if you get 10, 10, 10, 10, that's a perfect black label 10. Okay. And they become some of the most valuable cards on the planet, because it is very, very, very hard because of their quality control. But now PSA's parent company has bought them. So does that mean that the caliber of Beckett is now less reliable? Then you've got new players in the game like Tag, who I kind of like the idea of what they're trying to do. I don't think the technology is there yet, and that is using artificial intelligence to grade cards. So taking the human factor, the passion factor out of it, and just looking straight into a robot that has all the metrics for perfection, right down to 0.000 whatever, and says, grade this card. The problem is the technology is not quite there yet. They have graded some cards that were fake, not a good look. Then again, so has PSA recently, according to some recent reports. You also have issues with the quality of the slabs. There's rumors that the tags are quite more likely to snap. I don't know if that's still true in 2026, but there was quite a few videos posted last year that reflected that that could possibly have been an issue. So, you know, there's really not a lot of options to go with. Like, if you want to go down this road, as kind of sketchy as PSA is, if you want the value of that graded card or the rare ability, is that even a word? You kind of have to go with these guys. Because if we go back again to what we were talking about before, if we go back over to our collector app, again, please sponsor me, guys. I know I've got like 16 subscribers, but please, you know, if you go over here to, let's say this Leafeon card that we've got, that's right, Humble Flex. If we go over to graded here, like a PSA 10 is $738, right? Whereas if we go over to CGC in a standard 10, it's about $492. If you get something a bit rarer, like a pristine 10, it does go up. The black label BGS, as we talked about, obviously $6,000. But ultimately, the values of the other companies for anything short of a 10, you do drop off quite a bit. You know, the tags are usually a lot less. You know, 465, it's several $100 less. Unless you're getting these perfect 10s from maybe a CGC, they're not usually as well loved. They're usually a lot harder to move. Normally the raw value of the card, so if you have a look over here, $481 is what this card goes for raw, because Evolving Skies was a very popular set, but also incredibly hard to pull anything. This was the only rare card that we basically pulled from this set after. I don't want to even talk about how many rips, but my wife got super lucky ripping this one. We see that a Gem Mint 10 from this company is basically the same value as a raw card, and you had to pay money to do it. Now, there is one aspect of a lot of these companies, though, that I prefer to PSA. And this is one thing that I find it really hard to feel good about with PSA, and that is the hostage taking. All right, so if you don't know what I mean is, when you send your card away, you normally submit at a certain tier. And those tiers are normally defined on the perceived value of your card when you send it. Now, what happens is, let's say that you strike gold, right? You get one of those cards where its value increases 10 times what it was the second it went into that beautiful PSA 10 slab. They send you an email and saying, hey, congratulations, your card did really well, but based on what we've estimated it's worth now, you have gone into a different tier, and you also have a much higher insurance risk for us to be able to send this card back to you. So I'm going to have to kind of hang on to this card unless you send me another couple of hundred, or if it's super rare, old and vintage, maybe even a few $1,000s. Like if you have a card that's in that $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 range, which I don't, but if you do, they may hold your card hostage for thousands of dollars. And if you don't pay it, that card doesn't come back. Now, I actually don't know what happens if they get into that situation where they basically say, look, we need to get our money back somehow. Do they take it out of the slab? I have no idea, to be honest, but it doesn't sound fun. What I do know is that being successful for having a nice card should not have extra money attached to it. We are paying these companies for their professional eyes on the card. What is this card valued at? That's the end of your conversation, Mr. Grading Person. Your job is done. And Tag and these other companies do that. You pay them for the grading services and shipping it back. And that's what they do. If the value changes, fantastic. I think there might be some clauses that if there is an insurance, you might have to pay for the postage insurance. That's more than fair. I mean, if they're sending back a card that's way, way, way more valuable, both of you want that, or at least you want the option to be able to get that extra insurance. Because if it gets $20,000 worth of value and then the postie smashes it on the way to your house, you have no recourse otherwise. So I think that's more than fair. But PSA basically penalizing you for a successful card does feel incredibly rough. Then there is obviously the pay to play. I mean, this is not new. Yeah, it's definitely legal, morally ambiguous, but it is definitely, the rich win. That you do get a priority VIP service. If you pay more money, you get your card back faster. All those sort of things. But I mean, that's the nature of, commerce in 2026. Let's be real. There's a very anti-capitalist part of me that wishes that wasn't true. But it's probably the thing that I hate the most about PSA. Like if you took everything else out of the equation, it's like, okay, what should be a moment of pure joy or ecstasy where you go, oh, the perfect card, my God, Kobe. Then all of a sudden you go, oh man, there's now, I sent this card away with my last $50 and I'm barely scraping by the next payday, which is the reality for a lot of people in the world these days, especially if you're a Pokemon collector. I mean, please subscribe to my channel. I need the money. Ultimately, to get hit with hundreds of dollars, right, or not get your card back, that can make or break someone. Like if it's just going into your personal collection, you're paying what was, let's say, $8.50 for a pack if you were lucky enough to rip it yourself from a card show. That card now has cost you $300 or $400. So if the market crashes in the future or something happens, you didn't want to be in the investing game, but now you kind of are because you spent money on this card. And if everything, fell down from the sky and you needed to sell that at auction tomorrow to make some cash back, you'd want to at least get that money back, right? So that aspect of PSA is probably my least favorite. So I guess to the nerds out there in the Southern Hemisphere, to those of you in Australia, how do you feel about this news? Is this something that excites you? Is this something that you're a little bit more cautious about? Are you really anti-PSA so you don't care? Are you just a raw dogger from way back? Yep, I know what I said. And you just prefer your cards in a binder. If you're a binder boy, man, I got nothing against it. I respect it. I was a binder boy until probably mid last year. And then I spent a little bit too much time in Dubai on a work trip at a card show, saw how much more beautiful some of these cards are. when they're not in their top loaders, but more importantly, when I've got kids in the game, like to have my cards go in the hands of kids and you go, it feels bad as a dad to sort of say, no, don't touch it like that. Don't get your fingers on it. We'll wipe off the Cheeto dust, you know? It feels bad to do that. Like I want the kids to be able to handle this card and go, look at this, Dad. This is a super rare Charizard. Do you remember that time we pulled this? I want them to have that. You know what I mean? So with a PSA slab, well, it's protected, or any slab really, it means that we can do that. We can get it out of the case. We can go to that. My daughter, we play shops sometimes. So I actually 3D printed not long ago this little carousel so she can put the cards on there and you can spin it around, and she pretends to be a Pokemon vendor and she rips me off like crazy. For a 6-year-old, she has a future in sales. I tell you what, you don't want to encounter her when she is 18 and running her own stand at a card show, folks. She's going to eat you alive. But that's the fun, right? And we couldn't do that without the slabbing because, you know, they are kids. You know, 6-year-olds handling a, you know, $1,500 card is a mad thing to do, but I kind of want that to be able to happen because that's the point of the hobby, right? It's something that I love. I grew up on. I love the characters, the games, maybe not the modern games. But the cards, like we connect over this. Me and my wife, you know, this is something we've done as a hobby together. We get excited about this. We talk about this. So yeah, how do you feel about it? Do you care? Is it a win? It's not a loss. You know, for me, I'm optimistic. I am hoping this is a great thing for the hobby. I am certainly going to have a lot of fun with it if it's cheap, if it's easy to access, if the turnaround time is good. And for me, it means I can obviously protect a lot of our lower grade cards. It means my kid, you know what I mean? Like if she wants to submit a whole batch of cards, that's cool, you know, because she is fringe interest. She's a Sprigatito Terapagos kind of kid. You know what I mean? She's growing up in the Horizons anime era, whereas I grew up in Red and Blue. So look, I'm optimistic. I'm cautious. I'm everything. What do you think, folks? Thank you for watching another episode of One Nerd All Things, or listening to it if you're on Spotify. Again, please, likes, subscribes, comments, everything matters right now. The bells. I know you guys know this technology more than I do. I love you very much. Thank you for listening. I hope to catch you on the next one.